And welcome back to another Perspectives. And what I wish to do here is kind of offer a follow-on to the previous chat. And the last chat was the predictive programming dystopian memes. And I talked about how predictive programming can be used to prepare or program the human mind for certain planned events. But I talked about it in a dystopian way, i.e. certain planned events that some agencies may wish to start to condition humans into accepting a certain future, or to prepare them for a certain event in the future. Now, of course, the human life is always a mesh of many forces operating together. And in that last video, I spoke about one particular side of that, the dystopian side, the negative conditioning side. But of course, the other side also exists and is also working and operating simultaneously. And after I'd made the last video, I was reminded of the sci-fi writer Philip K. Dick, who was obviously very well known because of the amount of films being made from his novels. Now, his novels weren't that popular in his lifetime, or only started to get popular at the end of his lifetime, because he was seen as a kind of pulp fiction writer, i.e., a lesser quality. But the ideas in his books eventually got recognized. And so we had films like The Minority Report, Blade Runner, Total Recall, which had been made twice, A Scanner Darkly, The Adjustment Bureau, many more, Paycheck, and many more other films. And he actually said in an interview near the end of his life that he finally realized what was happening in his writing was that he felt that he was receiving information or storylines from his future self, as if he was actually receiving future narratives that are potential future timelines. And so he wrote these narratives in his books to show or warn humanity these are potential future timelines if we continue where we're going. And of course, Minority Report at the time seemed such a futuristic thing about precognition police, but as we know, it's almost is a reality now. So I wanted to look at the concept that such popular fiction, especially science fiction, how it has been or can be used potentially as a way to seed ideas ahead of their actualization. So the other side is predictive programming to condition people into a particular mindset. And the other way is to creatively seed ideas and concept into the human mind to see if they then blossom and develop. And so I wanted to look at some excerpts from a chapter of a book which I feel is an important book. And those of you who have seen my top 10 books have realized that I spoke highly of this book, which is called The People of the Secret by Ernest Scott. And there's a lot of good material in here. And The People of the Secret was first published in 1983. If you can get a copy of this, I would highly recommend it. If not, you may be able to find a PDF on archive, internetarchive.org. Now, chapter 12 is actually called Science Fiction and the Ancient Tradition. And I'm going to read some excerpts from this, which I think will stimulate the points that I wish to make. And I I've chosen extracts because rather than reading the whole chapter, of course. So it says, does the life process seem like the result of random forces? Or does it suggest the unfolding of a vast and solemn plan? No mustering of selected historical incidents, no suggested sequence, no interrelatedness can prove the existence of a noumenal level, a higher intelligence level. At best, we can see flecks of foam on the surface and suspect the existence of a wave system underneath. Of its very nature, this must be invisible. What this suggests is that there is a higher intelligence unknown to most people, which actually, while external events seem random and of no relationship, actually they could be connected in ways we don't understand. If there is some great plan for man and the world, with solar and cosmic goals set against millions of years, and if our present state is one stage in such a plan, then certain considerations arise which must be squarely faced. So, if we are part of a much grander scheme, and if life and evolution on this planet has to fit in with solar and cosmic goals set against a backdrop of millions of years, we need to shift our thinking. This chapter continues, if this has been arranged, can the intelligence which arranged it be benign? It seems that any theory of intervention must stand accused by human standards. We feel that suffering is regrettable enough when it is a consequence of chance and hazard. If it is purposive and deliberate, we can only regard it as intolerable. The answer, if there is one, must lie in the idea of scale. So, if there is an intervention in human affairs from a higher intelligence, and we would, obviously by human standards, we don't like interventions, and if these interventions cause events that we would consider as suffering or something, we would find this intolerable. But the author says we have to look at the issue of scale. So, for example, let's give an example that you're trying to catch the bus. The bus is starting away and is already accelerating, and only by a strenuous sprint can we hope to catch it. Our decision to make the effort triggers off a whole sequence of bodily events. Extra adrenaline pours into our blood. Our muscles contract in exceptional effort. By our deliberate action, we destroy millions of body cells. Each of these cells is a little life. They die. In a real sense, they are sacrificed to our aim. Do we feel compassion? Can we truly say that we experience remorse for their destruction from an action we took? So that's a telling example of how many millions of body cells we may sacrifice in a certain action. But of course we don't consider that. This continues. This limitation of scale is connected with time, with the maximum and minimum of the present moment, which our consciousness is able to span. A time scale gap closer to everyday experience may illustrate this. Suppose a young child has a thorn deeply embedded in its finger. The mother sees the situation in terms of a present moment vastly greater than the child's. She sees her baby's life as a whole, its well-being, growth, maturity. She takes a needle, digs it under the thorn, and removes it. The child's present moment is restricted to the 3 or 4 seconds during which a needle is piercing its flesh. In terms of the child's present moment, the mother is committing an incomprehensible act of cruelty, a deliberate infliction of needless suffering. The child does not understand, and cannot, that the mother's action arises from concern for its own ultimate good. To appreciate this, the child would need access to a present moment which it does not possess and at its stage of development cannot possess. So that's an analogy to say that certain actions are taken which benefit the larger, grander timescale or lifespan. Now, the mother with the grander vision of the welfare of the child knows that to get at this thorn immediately is necessary for its long-term well-being, its extended life. The child may only have a consciousness present moment of a few seconds or in the present moment, and doesn't conceive of the future, and therefore the pain it receives in getting out of the thorn, it only perceives that as suffering in that moment. In this analogy can go in many ways. We may have to go to the dentist and have dental work which is very, very painful, and we think, but it's okay, our teeth are fine. And the dentist will say, yes, but if you leave it like that and don't have the work on your teeth in the future when you mature, you're going to have a lot of problems. So it's a relative time scale of how our consciousness perceives our present moment and the life continuation. So this chapter continues by saying that certain interventions have operated and have been necessary. And it says, if such an influence exists, it clears many coincidences which prove intractable to ordinary explanation. If we can understand that these interventions and impulses and influences exist, then a lot of coincidences disappear. It continues, there are many examples of inventions individually improbable being arrived at simultaneously by different people. Writers sometimes find themselves impelled to write extraordinary fantasy, which is later found to be prophetic. Dante, in the Divine Comedy, gives an exact description of the Southern Cross, a constellation which is invisible in the Northern Hemisphere and which no traveller in those days could ever have seen. Jonathan Swift, in his book The Journey to Laputa, gives the distances and periods of rotation of the two satellites of Mars unknown at that time. When the American astronomer Asaph Hall discovered them in 1877 and noticed that his calculations corresponded to Swift's indications, he was seized with a sort of panic and named them Phobos and Deimos, fear and terror. And the book goes on to give many prophetic actualities, such as a science fiction cartoon strip in a London Daily Mail newspaper had a fantasy character put a plaque on the conquest of the moon, and the date of the conquest, the first landing on the moon, was August the 4th, 1969. So decades before, he predicted the actual event to within a fortnight of the actual landing. And there's more and more. So again, it says here, it may also be that coming events are deliberately foreshadowed to prepare a mental climate for the event that lies on the line of probable actualization. There are reasons to suppose that almost the whole of science fiction belongs to this category. Space travel and atomic energy came as only minimal surprises to world populations which were barely emerging from the steam age. Verne, that's Jules Verne, and Wells, H.G. Wells, and a whole host of later writers like Asimov and Clarke envisioned coming developments of science so concretely that they were able to present their fantasies as virtual realities. Thus, the ideas became acceptable mental currency in advance of their actualization. The idea of altering human behavior by the deliberate manipulation of environment is one with no apparent ancestry. Barely discernible traces of it are to be found in esoteric literature. Suddenly, from nowhere, it becomes a familiar everyday idea. It would be hard to imagine a subject less likely to appeal to a mass television audience, yet Patrick McGowan's The Prisoner was built on this idea, and with the suggestion that a level existed above which people were immune to this manipulation. So basically they're talking about here how there can be an altering of human behavior, i.e. the seeding of ideas, which then can influence your environment. And a lot of this could very well be coming through science fiction, which has received influences, ideas, inspiration from a level beyond humanity, which is seeding ideas into these writers or creative artists, and is then foreshadowing a time to come. And I think this sentence is very significant. It may also be that coming events are deliberately foreshadowed to prepare a mental climate for the event that lies on a line of probable actualization. So the previous video I talked about predictive programming, that there's certain forces trying to condition the human mind into falling into a particular way of life that is going to be manufactured for them. So there's going to be, let's say, a certain dystopian technocratic future set up, and then we're going to fall into it because we've been conditioned to understand or accept that this is the timeline we're on. Whereas there are other forces from benign higher intelligence that are trying to foreshadow coming events by creating seeding ideas. So human creativity through free will, not conditioning, will then put these ideas out into society and try to creatively cultivate the human mind, which is creatively cultivated different from conditioning. And then the book goes on to talk about other works of science fiction which could very well fall into this category. In fact, one phrase, it says that they talk about a certain book by Walter M. Miller, A Canticle for Leibowitz. Here the concepts show such remarkable insight into actual mechanisms that it is to be conjectured either that the author is a remarkably sensitive receiver, or else has structured his insights on the basis of knowledge from a genuine source. What they suggest is that either some writers or creative people are either connected to a genuine source of wisdom and they are being used as transmitters of these insights, or they're being used as sensitives or receivers. And my sense is that a great deal of human creativity and ingenuity, what we call inspiration, comes from sources which are feeding these higher level concept ideas into the human level of consciousness, to then to be put out into our environment to catalyze and creatively cultivate the human environment. Of course, we call it inspiration. In the past, the Greeks called it the muses. The goddesses were muses. So even the Greeks recognized that their muse, their inspiration, came from the goddesses, i.e. the higher intelligent life forms. And my sense is that a great deal of human inspiration and imagination comes through this way. It's just that the human ego, you find a lot of creative artists saying, "Oh, you know, this is my creation, this is my invention." A lot of writers, if you see them in interviews, they're talking about, "Well, I had this idea, this is my character," and they talk about their book, you know, really from a very selfish, egotistical position, as if they've just created everything themselves, and they don't always give due credit to the flow of inspiration, which often can collaborate with a receiver, and a receiver functions then as a transmitter into the cultural domain. So I think these are two, I think this understanding, this concept, sits well with the previous one, with predictive programming, where that is a manipulation of human thinking patterns, and a intervention into human thinking which bypasses the free will and is trying to manipulate behavior patterns to fit into an environment that is being established deliberately or artificially. Programming and conditioning to fit into a prearranged environment. Then the other side, which I've been talking about now, is that there are influences, non-visible influences, which come from a benign intelligent source, which aim to seed creative ideas and concepts which can further human development in a constructive, positive way by seeding the cultural environment with these concepts, which potentially could be actualized later through our free will if we choose to actualize them. And I think I sense that it's only fair to have these understandings of these two operations that are functioning together, and you know, and to be able to discern when one is a top-down, dominant, manipulative operation of programming, and when one is a benign operation to creatively catalyze advancement of human development. And so I'll leave it there. Thanks for bearing with me and listening, and the caravan moves on. Until next time, cheers.